Welcome to our live webinar with CBRE and HRO Resources. I'm Marcus Malone, the Vice President of Sales at HRO Resources, and we're looking forward to giving you guys some good information today and talking about commercial leases and landlord negotiations in the age of COVID-19. So I've got Brian and we've got Sydney with us at CBRE, and the goal is really to be efficient and with the conversation and quickly get to the Q&A. I know the Q&As have been really kind of the meat of it in the recent webinars we've been doing, especially on a topic like this. I know everybody's excited to get their questions out. So there's a Q&A button either at the top or the bottom of your screen. If you'll submit your questions in that box versus the chat box, we'll monitor that, and at the end of the presentation, we'll get into the Q&A session. So a little bit about HRO. We're a one-stop resource for our clients, and our goal is to bring them efficiencies and reduce cost across a broad scale of their business. And some of the key areas that we focus in are employee benefits, risk management, technology, payroll, and human resources. And really, we're built to serve companies with anywhere from 2 employees on up to a couple of thousand employees. So broad scale. Many different types of industries. Just wanted to share some recent wins that we've had so far this year. We recently saved a 30-employee industrial distribution company $18,000 in annual admin costs, and that was around the areas of HR and payroll. And then we had a 100-employee oil and gas company that we saved over $150,000 with our multiple employer 401k plan. So our clients that are at least payroll clients with us have access to the multiple employer 401k plan. And more recently, we've had a 700-employee auto dealership that we saved $1 million in annual healthcare costs. So pretty significant. There's a lot of different ways that we can help and be a resource for many different types of companies, different industries of all different sizes. So if there's a way we can be a resource for you and help you guys grow your business better navigate some of the challenges that we're all facing, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you guys and see if we can help out. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian, and we'll get started with the conversation about commercial leases.
Hey, thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it. This is Brian Ashby. I'm with CBRE. I primarily focus on the retail sector and helping retailers grow their footprint locally, regionally, and nationally. I'll tell you a little bit about CBRE, just in case you aren't familiar. CBRE is the largest commercial real estate services company in the world by more than double. We're a top Fortune 150 company. We have over 100,000 employees across the globe, and we're present in over 100 countries. So I think it's like 128 now. So we have a great group of folks around the world that can offer a lot more than just brokerage. Often people think of CBRE as a purely brokerage house, but we can do anything from property management to capital markets. We can do facilities management. We can help you develop things, do due diligence, so on and so forth. So really would like for everyone to think about CBRE as a broader range of services, and really we focus on being more advisors than brokers these days, and just trying to help our clients in any way that we can. So with that, Danae and the HRO team reached out to have us talk today about some of the leasing issues that have been brought to the forefront here amongst the COVID crisis. And I'm here today to kind of help you out with a few strategies and ideas. If you're having issues with your landlords as far as trying to figure out how do we work through this, I can't pay rent at this time, so on and so forth, some ways to kind of go about that. So Marcus, if we can move on with the slides here. Yeah, there's just a map. So a good place to start is to talk about the different major sectors in the real estate world, just kind of a quick and dirty on where they're at. As far as office, there's definitely been some sublease space on the market. I think coming out of this, you're going to see people need more square footage within their existing offices, just kind of a social distancing thing. A lot of workplace strategies today have switched to more of a hoteling, more of a condensed footprint. But we may see that swing back the other direction as a result, just trying to give people some space. I think we're going to see a lot more comfort with telecommuting, both from the corporate standpoint as well as the employee standpoint. Those who did not use a lot of telecommuting before because they weren't comfortable have kind of been forced to do it now. And I think going forward, we'll see more of that. As for the retail sector, it's been pretty negative. Restaurants are obviously struggling, so definitely appreciate everybody doing what they can to support their local businesses and restaurants during this time. We've seen landlords receiving anywhere from 30 to 70% of their rent rolls, expected rent rolls. So they're getting cash calls from the banks. So, you need to understand that you as a tenant might be suffering, your landlord as a landlord might be suffering as well. And they have someone to answer to, being their lenders and whatnot as well. So it's definitely something that's flowing downhill. In the retail sector, it's really been the grocers and, the e-commerce folks such as Amazon and the like that have really shone bright in this time. There's going to be a lot of department stores, fitness concepts that may not come out of this. We're hearing 24-hour fitness may be filing, Neiman Marcus may be filing, JCPenney is on the cusp. So a lot of household names that we love and are familiar with may not survive this. It's quite sad. So in the industrial sector, we've seen really a parting of the ways between two different, classifications. We can say the basic needs group has been flourishing, and the nice to haves group, which is, your luxury items, not your daily needs, and that kind of thing. All of those, textile groups and such have really been struggling. Whereas, the people that are in the basic needs column have been going through what we refer to as supply shock, where they literally are just trying to keep up with demand and having a hard time doing so. So it's really been a dichotomy as it relates to industrial. Okay, we can move on there. All right, so here is some strategies that are pertaining to how you might try to restructure your lease with your landlord coming out of this or even amidst this. So we've seen a lot of retail clients of ours not pay rent in the months of March and April. And that is because they have not been able to open for business. So, they have a good argument in that. And so in reaching out to landlords of how to repay that rent or find some kind of agreement, the first kind of restructuring strategy is to blend and extend. And on the next slide here in a moment, I'll kind of walk you through a specific example here. But the kind of macro level ideal here is, if you were to go 2 months without paying rent, well, maybe you can extend your lease term by those 2 months to kind of make the landlord whole. And then you take the rent that you did not pay those 2 months and maybe amortize it over your remaining lease term. So I'll kind of walk you through an example of what that might look like. I try to keep it round numbers, but that's kind of one route that we've seen a lot of people going, and hopefully landlords are being willing to work with you guys. We've seen everything from landlords that say, hey, if you don't pay, you don't stay, and kicking tenants to the curb. And I think those that have a less short-term mind frame have realized that they don't want a lot of vacancy right now or in the future, and have been willing to work with their existing tenant base. So another strategy here that we'll touch on is a percentage rent only deal. This only works if you have actual sales that, maybe like a restaurant, for instance, is the best example of when we see percentage rent in deals. Typically, if you do have a volume of sales, you may already have some level of base rent that you pay, and then there's a smaller percentage rent piece that if you meet certain sales thresholds, the landlord then starts to participate via a percentage rent payment from the tenant. We see that being kind of a typical market percentage rent is 5% over a quote unquote natural break point. So that is simply your annual rent divided by the percentage that you agree upon. So if you did $1 million in sales, You divide that by the 5% that's agreed upon with the landlord. Then you have kind of your sales threshold for the year of what you would need to hit before you started paying 5% of your sales over over and above $1 million. So once you hit that threshold, then you pay 5% of your sales to the landlord. That's how that would work. So what we've seen is in instances like this where maybe restaurants are able to do 20% of their pre-COVID volumes, you could shift to a percentage rent only deal and say, hey, landlord, I'm not doing the robust sales that I'm used to doing, but I want to pay something in this time, and I'm willing to pay you a percentage of whatever I'm able to get in the door. And so with a percentage, rent only deal, there is no break point. It literally starts at zero. But as a result of that, a higher percentage than what I would refer to as the market 5%. Something more like 8%, as you see here, is probably fair. Obviously, you want to minimize that to the extent that you can. So if you use a broker or whoever's negotiating on your behalf, obviously, 6% is better than 8%, so on and so forth. But in this case, if maybe you're only doing 20% of your what would have been 100% sales volume, then the landlord gets a little bit of rent in the interim, and maybe it's something that you can afford to pay as a small percent of the sales you are able to get in the door there. So the next restructuring strategy is simply, if you'll have to look at your lease, but if you have sublease or assignment rights, is to try to market your space and get out from under it. The tough part about that right now that's different than a typical market is there's not a lot of tenants necessarily looking for space. I mean, there's definitely some industrial growth right now in certain sectors, and maybe a little bit of office. Retail has not been very busy, other than maybe grocers, so on and so forth. But you can always put your space up for sublease and get out of that lease obligation that way. And then the last one is don't pay rent. I mean, you got to realize that you will likely or be putting yourself in the way of a potential default risk, from your landlords. But at the same time, if you don't have it, you can't pay it. Fully understand that. We've seen some of our national tenants that they're actually global retail companies literally not pay rent across the board, taking a 0% stance. So, it's if they can't get sales, they can't afford to pay. And so that might be a stance you need to take, given the current environment. I think if that is a stance you take, you still try to work with your landlord to maybe extend the term by 2 to 3 months here, whatever call it a day for day slip, since the governor has come out with a mandate to everyone to stay at home and close all the offices and whatnot. But anyways, that not paying rent is an option. So, okay. So from here, what we'll do is we'll go to the next slide, and we will show you a little example of blend and extend, which I truly think will be the most utilized across the board in this time. So, Marcus, if I can get the next slide there.
Let's see, it should be on.
Got it. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, so I made some assumptions here to try to keep it kind of round numbers. So in this example, we're assuming you are in the 36-month or the third full year of a 60-month or 5-year lease. And we're just assuming that the rent is $10,000 a month, and that you were unable to pay rent for March and April as a result of your business's doors being closed. So the total loss to landlord, 2 months of no rent at $10,000 a month, is $20,000. So you had a 36-month lease on a 60-month term, or you're 36 months into the lease. So you have 24 months remaining as the lease stands today. So the plan would be to blend the abated rent of the $20,000 over that 24-month period. In order to get a full 24 months at this point, you would have to extend your lease, which should be quite easy to do via a quick kind of one-page amendment to the lease. So you would just extend that period for 2 months, and then you take the $20,000 you were unable to pay and you amortize it into those remaining 24 months, which will increase your monthly payment by $904.55. Now you'll notice that I used 8% when amortizing this. Now, if you're not familiar with how to amortize, there's actually an amortization function in Excel that really, it makes it pretty easy. You could do a quick Google search on it. It'll walk you through it. But 8% is what we've been using kind of as a market standard across the board to amortize dollars in and out of a rent. So most landlords, that'll be the percentage they'll want to use. Look, if you can get it at a lower percentage, again, 7%, 6%, 4%, interest rates are really low right now. So you have a good argument. That would be the thing to do. But I would anticipate seeing 8% from landlords. So now you would have a new monthly payment that's almost $11,000 over the next 24 months, and if you got the 2 extra months added onto the term, and you have successfully blended and extended, which again, I think this will be the 90% solution for a lot of folks. All right.
Just launching a quick poll question.
Yeah.
You guys see them? Okay. We'll give it just a second. All right. Give it just a few more seconds. All right. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, next slide, Brian.
Yeah, sure. So, in seeking to do these rent deferment agreements, I have a good friend in Abe Gorin at Wilson Cribbs and Gorin, who's one of the best real estate attorneys in the city. And he came up with a really handy dandy rent deferment agreement that you should really be able to populate yourself without the help of attorney. Obviously, we always recommend that you do run anything that is legally binding through an attorney. But there's a link to that document. It's a Google Doc I created. So feel free to go on there and make use of this, and hopefully that'll be a big help to a lot of folks that voted yes on the poll question there. All right, let's go to the next one, Marcus. There we go, force majeure. Yeah, so most leases today have a force majeure clause. So to put it plainly, force majeure is kind of your act of God clause, whereas if it's a hurricane, massive flood, earthquake, tornado, COVID-19, right, kind of crisis, that it kind of gets both parties out of their obligations for whatever the downtime is. So if you do have a lease in place, and this is of interest to you, you probably do have a force majeure clause or clauses within your lease. So you need to refer to those, see where they're at, see what they say. Maybe you have some help there that can, help you defer some rent or abate some rent, get you out of that obligation. And again, you'll still need to work it through with your landlord and negotiate. But I've also included a good force majeure clause that's kind of a typical one we see in leases for your use. If you're going to ever be negotiating a lease, I think it's imperative that you have a force majeure clause in there. We have seen some nightmare scenarios from folks that didn't, and it's a sad thing. So please be cognizant of, if you have an existing lease, that this clause is likely in there, and go read it and see what it says. And then or anytime you're going to sign a lease going forward, definitely be thinking about the act of God clause as we deem it, and get it in there to protect you. And with that, I'll say thank you and turn it over to questions from the audience. And definitely, here's all my contact info. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Or if you do need some help with an existing lease or where to go, what to do next, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, we appreciate it, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A questions. I know it looks like we've got a couple that have came in through the conversation, so let's see what we've got. All right, Brian, so do you see landlords renegotiating lease terms if upcoming on option terms? I'd assume they will be experiencing some drop in tenants and will negotiate more with existing long-standing tenants.
I think that's a great question. I think you are very smart and wise to try to negotiate those option terms as best you can. What I will say, we've seen through a couple of recessions and it does take some time for landlords' heads to come back down out of the clouds. I mean, the market, as many of you are aware, has just been on absolute fire for almost a decade now. It's been the longest running development cycle we've ever seen. And that, which is all well and good, but what it's done is kind of have the landlords expecting these very high rents that they've become accustomed to receiving. A lot of times it depends the situation the landlord is in. If they recently bought the center, then they're going to have a lot less flexibility because they budgeted those rents when they bought it. And they have people, their lenders giving them cash calls if they're not making their obligations. If it's a landlord that has owned the center forever, they have no debt on it, all that kind of stuff, they're in a better position to renegotiate and will likely be more willing to hear you out. So the stance of the landlord will be kind of centered around their debt that they have on the actual center or what have you, or building. But again, I do think it's smart to try to get what you can on options. I would recommend being careful that you do it, in your approach there, just so they don't, think you see blood in the water, that kind of thing. But I think that overall, within a year's time, we're going to see a lot of vacancy on the market. We're going to see rents come down as landlords are forced to take what they can get. So yeah, I do think you'd be smart to kind of do what you can on those options and see if you can get yourself a better deal. The other thing is, to create leverage on that from that perspective with your landlord is there's going to be vacancy in a market where maybe there hasn't been in a while, and maybe you do have those options to move, or maybe you haven't had those options before. So just another way to kind of bolster some leverage there.
Thanks, Brian. We have another one. So is there any pending legislation in the residential sector for college students that are unable to attend an out-of-state university because of COVID-19, so they aren't even living in their apartments? Is there any way they can get out of their lease early, or if they stop paying rent, is there any way to have it not adversely affect their credit?
Wow, that I do not claim to be an expert on. I don't know, Sydney, do you have any feedback on that at all? Have you seen anything on the residential side as far as what's happening?
I don't do residential, so it's still tricky for me. I will say my cousin's dealing with this situation in Colorado, and he went and looked at his lease, and there is a force majeure clause in his lease as well, in his apartment lease. We've kind of heard it's hit or miss on force majeure because it's a pandemic. It's not really an act of God. We're not even sure if it's an act of man or not. So they are fighting that because obviously they have loans to pay as well, as Brian mentioned. But I would say look at your lease first. And if there's nothing in your lease that states anything about a force majeure incident or some act of God, or medical reasons, anything like that, I don't know, just look at your lease and see what it says first. And I think that's the best answer I have, is what does it say in your lease first? And then from there, if not, then I bet there's going to be a lot of incidences where people are suing.
Yeah, and I think this is a widespread problem that you're facing. I've talked to some other people. I have several neighbors who have all their college kids at home living with them right now, and I imagine that's what you're going through as well. And So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits that stem out of this. So what I'm hoping is there's some kind of answer from legislation on how best to handle, to your point, and so just to keep from, you know, the courthouses being full, you know, around the clock for the next, you know, year or two. So I would imagine there has to be some kind of plan as it relates to college students in specific ultimately. So we'll see how it fares out here.
Sydney, are you seeing a lot of, I mean, are you having a lot of office tenants that are reaching out about negotiating their leases? And if so, what are some things that maybe you've seen be effective with office tenants?
I know that there's a ton of office tenants that are renegotiating. We had an internal call with CBRE, and they were discussing how a lot of tenants will be shifting more, and a lot of landlords will be shifting more towards agile work spaces. So subleasing a portion of their office space basically for an open WeWork type environment, and where most landlords will actually be investing in putting agile workspaces in their office buildings, to where in the instance of something like this happens again, tenants aren't locked in to rent that they can't pay in 100,000 square feet, you know, with 3 floors or 4 floors of office space, but they're able to reduce their number of memberships, et cetera, accordingly as they need to. So it just creates a more agile work environment for both landlords and tenants, because they have this space that isn't necessarily built out and connected to this other tenant's space that now they're trying to sublease. Now they have to give a bunch of money to these tenants to try to release the space. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more tenants and landlords building out their space and positioning it to be more leasable to another company to come and join in their workspace in the future.
Sure. And I do think that negotiate with your office landlords, particularly if you're in Houston right now, the oil and gas, you know, falling off the grid essentially. There has been a lot of sublease space hit the market. There's going to be a lot of options to move. Landlords are going to be eager to keep the tenants they do have. So I think, you know, it's absolutely wise to negotiate during these times, especially, you know, or maybe even if you have, you know, a 10-year lease and you're on year 6, maybe you hit them up and lock in a new 10-year deal right now. I mean, it's not a terrible strategy. It gives them some, you know, a brand new lease and some more term
in exchange for a little bit of a rent reduction.
A rent reduction. That's no, exactly. Yep. So yeah, anyways, I think, you know, I would advise anybody that's a tenant anywhere right now to pull out that lease, read a couple of important clauses that we've highlighted here, and maybe start negotiating. So.
Absolutely. So what about in the case of maybe, let's say a restaurant in particular? What would be the first step that maybe a restaurant would take if they want rent relief? Would they be reaching out to CBRE? Would they be reaching out to their lawyer? What would be their best first step?
Yeah, I mean, I would consult maybe a lawyer as well as a broker. You could probably start with a broker on your existing lease to see, kind of read it and see what it says, and see what kind of protection you may already have in your existing lease. Outside of, you know, and then once you know, anyone that's helping you, any advisor, kind of, you have a good idea of where you're at and what kind of protection you may or may not have, then it's time to approach your landlord and think about how to restructure existing leases. And you know, we've seen a lot of landlords be very willing to talk about blending and extending or different kind of strategies like that. So they're trying to be as amenable as they can for the most part, we've seen. So yeah, I think the first good step would be to, you know, reach out to a broker and or a legal representative and see what you've got in your lease already. Talk that through, and then, you know, the next step from there would be, you know, contacting the landlord.
Awesome. We appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, that's going to do it for the Q&A. We appreciate the questions, and thank you all for providing, you know, good feedback and solid information for us. We appreciate that. We're going to be doing a lot more of these webinars. We've done some here over the past couple of weeks, and we appreciate the attendance and the great questions that are coming from this. A couple of upcoming webinars we have. I know next Tuesday we have one on virtual leadership, and then the following will be about business interruption insurance. And we want to hear from all of y'all. So if you have questions, in relation to our conversation today, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Brian or Sydney directly. We'd be happy to help you out, get your questions answered. Or if you just have ideas on future topics of things that you would like to hear about, email those to me. We'd love to hear about those ideas and topics that y'all want to hear about. Let's see, we may have another question. Okay. All right, so let's see. So there's my contact information on the screen. It's got my cell phone, email, always the best ways to reach me. And then we'll be sending out an email too to everybody that's attended after this. So you'll have the information from today. You'll have each of our contact information so you can reach us if you have further questions or just want to talk about some ideas and things for the future. One more thing I did want to mention, and as a short message from our CEO, something that we're doing that just means a lot to us with everything that's been going on with COVID-19. And one of the most hardest hit industries is definitely the restaurant industry. I think we can all appreciate restaurants. We've all got our favorite places we wish we could probably go right now, but we've put together a website that's really just a site with resources to guide and to help restaurants as they begin to reopen. So I'm going to play a quick message from our CEO about this program.
Hi, Marcus. I don't think the audio is coming across too well, but what we can see is that we know restaurants have been hard hit in this crisis, and that's why we put together this. You can go ahead and play the video, Marcus. That's put together kind of the two things that we think will be most impactful for restaurants, and that's what they need to know before reopening, and that includes kind of the minimum standard health protocols that Governor Abbott just released yesterday for restaurants. And we'll continually be updating this website as the government, the state government releases more updates on that front. The second thing, which is even more important, is frankly access to funding. And so if you click that button, this site kind of goes over the Paycheck Protection Program, which every small business, including restaurants, should be applying for. If you click on the PPP status by bank, you'll be able to see all the different lenders, or I should say many different lenders, and their status as it relates to accepting applications. Some are continuing to accept applications. Others have stopped that process. We'll also be uploading videos. You can see there's already one on the PPP that we've done previously that we've uploaded here. And we'll also have this webinar on this site as well. And finally, if you do want to chat with us, just click on that chat with the PPP expert, and you can schedule a brief conversation, and we can help you kind of walk through that program as we've helped so many businesses thus far. So thank you, everyone. And again, that website is restart-tx.com.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Vinay. And thanks, everybody. Thanks again for CBRE. And again, if you guys don't mind, every restaurant share that information, share the link, restart-texas.com. We would appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more from you all and look forward to having you on future webinars.